Thank you for joining us for the first of our 2020 NAAFA webinar series. I am here today with Amy from Fat Girls Hiking and Nicky from Redstreak. We're going to talk about fat community events. Before I ask our two fabulous speakers to introduce themselves, I want to tell you that we're recording live today from Palabras bilingual bookstore in Phoenix. Palabras is the only bilingual bookstore in the state of Arizona. We are not doing a bilingual version of this webinar today. We'll be doing this webinar primarily in English with a little bit, you'll hear a little bit and then see a little bit of other language today. But we will have a transcript of this webinar available for any of you who need it. Right now we will only have an English language transcript, but we are working on expanding to having more of our NAAFA resources available in so thank you to our live audience here in Phoenix. One more time, would y'all make some noise so that they can hear that you are here and believe that you're here. Thank you so much. They have had some of our technical difficulties here that you all in the web audience missed, so we appreciate them so much. This is our first time hosting one of our webinars with a live audience. We will be taking some questions from them, and also if you're watching or listening online, we ask that you add your questions to the chat. We will be looking at the chat for your questions. And then for our live audience, they'll either ask the question and I'll repeat it, or if they are feeling sassy and want you to see their sassy faces, they will come on over and get in front of the camera. NAAFA, for those of you who are new to NAAFA, NAAFA is the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. We are a 50-year-old fat rights organization that has been working for equality at all sizes. Through fat visibility, through social events for fat people, and through political activism for fat people. We are proud believers in use of the word fat. We believe that that word is weaponized against people of size and that it's important for us to claim that word and use it unapologetically. So you will be hearing it a lot during this webinar. You will also, and you'll be hearing from other activists who share that belief and represent organizations that also share that belief. And we'll also use some other interchangeable terms or synonyms, and we'll stop and define those if we think there might be folks in the audience who don't know what we mean when we say them. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to my two guests today. We're going to be talking about fat community and fat event planning, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves a little bit, and then I'll share a little bit of my history around those topics. Nicky, would you start?
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Nicolette Parker. I am Standing Rock Sioux and Navajo. I have lived in the Phoenix Valley for almost like 20 years. I am a PhD student in Justice Studies program at Arizona State University, and I study online resistance movements for American Indian communities. I also co-started the Phoenix Fat Force with Tigress. And I'm just really happy to have everybody here in person and everybody online.
Thanks, Nicky. And Amy?
I'm Amy. I'm new to the Phoenix area, and I am the Fat Girls Hiking Phoenix chapter ambassador. In my spare time, I'm also a student studying Dutch studies to become an ASL interpreter.
And I put Amy on the spot by saying that you might see some ASL today. She is not here to fully translate into ASL. Unfortunately, that's not something that we have available yet from NAAFA, but as I said, we will have a transcript of this webinar available. So just a little bit of my history before I start asking these two about fat events. I am a recent retransplant to Phoenix. I grew up in the Phoenix area. I went to Chandler High School, if anybody else knows. And then I lived in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco and Oakland area for 21 years. And if you know anything about the Bay Area, you know that it is a hotbed of activism in a way that most other places in the country and in the world are not. It's fertile ground for people who are interested in social justice movements. And there's a lot of fat activists and fat liberation history that is actually centered around San Francisco and Oakland and other parts of the Bay. And because of that, I got used to being in a thriving community of people who regularly talk about their fat bodies and their rights and needs in their fat bodies. There are fat arts activities, there's fat dance, There were fat nightlife events. I was the hostess of one. There were more political organizations. There was a lot of activism from No Lose, which is another fat positive and sort of more, I think they would self-identify as more radical fat positive organization. And so I was used to being around that. And then when I decided to move back to Phoenix to be closer to my family, I started asking people, who do I need to know in Phoenix? Who am I going to connect with in Phoenix so I can get this same, fatty community that is, like I can go to these dance shows and I can, do these other activities that are super fat positive and I don't have to hear about weight loss and stuff. And people said, do you know Jess Baker? And I said, yes, I know Jess Baker, and she's in Tucson. If y'all know Jess Baker, Jess is a writer, activist, social media superstar, who talks about fat positivity and other forms of body positivity and body liberation. And Jess is fantastic. And I already know her, and she's one person. So I said, who else? And people said, do you know Jess Baker? And I said, I think you didn't really get it when I said I already know Jess. Who else? And I discovered that the reason I wasn't getting a lot in response to who else is because there wasn't a lot of who else. There are certainly individual activists here. There are people in the plus-size fashion community here, and that's how I came to meet Nicky. There are individual members of NAAFA here in the Phoenix area, although I think there are only 6 or 7 in the state of Arizona official members of NAAFA, but there are certainly folks who've been involved in NAAFA over the years. And so I really started to think about, what does it look like to start from scratch? When I was in Oakland, I started a nightlife event called Full Figure Entertainment, and I started that because there were already a couple of other plus-size nightlife events in the Bay, and I felt that they weren't Black-centered enough. I was going with other Black women. I was feeling like we were welcome to a certain extent, but we certainly were not the main attraction at these events. And there needed to be something that was more focused on us and where we were more centered. And so I started doing an event called Full Figure Friday, which was a hip-hop party. But because of who my friends were and because at the time I was a diversity educator by trade, I wanted to make sure it was an intersectional event, that it was, that it was a queer-friendly and gender-friendly event, that it was accessible whenever possible. I'll tell you a little bit about some mistakes I made with that and things that you maybe can avoid with that if you want to plan events. But when I started that event, even though my niche was new, the broader picture wasn't new. So there were people who might not have been interested in a fat positive hip-hop party, but they were still so supportive of fat positive community building that they would share my events or they would tell their friends, or there was still that kind of networking happening. And that's not happening yet here. And we are very aware that all over the country and all over the world, there are people who are in these isolated pockets that other than the internet, they don't have a chance to interact with people unless they travel somewhere else to do that. They don't have a chance to interact with people for things that are explicitly fat positive, where you're in a space where you can be protected from things like diet talk, and where you don't even have to be protected to them because nobody would even think of bringing that into the space, right? That's the value system that we want to create here, that we're trying to create here with the Phoenix Fat Force, that NAAFA has always tried to create. And so I asked Nicky initially to do this webinar to talk about the important social justice work she's doing around Indigenous communities, and she said, I think that's important, but I also think this is important. Let's do this, and then we can talk about that also. So we might bring her back for another one to talk about that. But in the meantime, we wanted to share a little bit about things we've done, things we've been to that worked and didn't work, things we've done that worked and didn't work, to sort of help other folks out there think about how to do something like what we're doing today. How do you get a bunch of people, like-minded people in the room, or people who want to get into that like-minded space in the room, and then what? So let's start, Nicky, let's go back to you and the fashion world, because Nicky is a fashion blogger, for those of you who don't know, and you should check out her fabulous pictures on Instagram. And Nicky, I think it was fashion events that kind of inspired you to think about bringing folks together. What are some of the events that you liked, and what did you learn from being an attendee there?
Yeah, so I, maybe like 5 years ago, I started a blog. It was called Palabras. And it was about fashion. And it was 3 or 4 years ago, I had started hearing about fat fashion events, and not even really explicitly fat fashion, is more so plus-size fashion events, particularly the CurvyCon, and that happens in New York City. Now I think it's like in their 5th or 6th year, and when I saw that event come and the ladies that were starting it, I was like, I have to go to this. Like, I just want to go to this. I personally was struggling to find other plus-size individuals in the Phoenix area that were fashionistas, fat fashionistas. And so I went to the CurvyCon, I think in the 2nd year, and I had so much fun. It was rejuvenating in the sense that I could go into a space, not have to worry about what people would think about my body, not have to worry about, finding a seat. That the organizers were very cognizant about making sure that there was seating available and lots of seating that was available. And as well as not having to worry about like so much diet talk and like weight loss and like focusing on me having to change my body to be able to fit in or to be liked. And so when I went to that very first event, I was so excited by what I had experienced, and I wanted to find if there were other events that were similar around. And I searched in Phoenix and I couldn't find anything. And eventually there was actually a small plus-size thrift shop that was here in Phoenix for a while, like in 2008, 2009. But it did not last for very long. The owner set up space on Roosevelt Row in one of the in the front of the art community at the time, and then they had closed their shop down and they had left and moved out of state. But other than that, there really wasn't anything else other for plus-size people to, I guess, coalesce together in a safe space. And so I had been looking for that. I had been looking online to see what was out there. And there definitely were some events that, really inspired me to want to bring something very similar here. So this very first one is the Big Fat Super Swap, which takes place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. For people who don't know about the Big Fat Super Swap, they started off with just this clothing swap where people would bring all their clothes and exchange them. You can exchange them for free, and you would be able to leave with as many clothes as you wanted to. And so I was like, what? This is amazing. I want to do something like that here too. I need clothing. I have clothing to give away. And so it was just sort of like seeing all of these different type of events happening on social media in other parts of the country that made me want to find a space here in Phoenix. And eventually when I couldn't find that space, like, it became a real like struggle of determining like how much time do I have to help to create that space. But yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you just want to be in the space. You don't want to be the one running the space, right? Like, obviously, if you're here or you're listening online, you have some interest in being in the space, and you probably have some interest in how the spaces are created. Maybe you're thinking of ideas of your own for creating those spaces. But, like, you don't want to always have to be the one to build it, right? So once you get the ball rolling, then you can think about how to share and make connections, and other people can build things.
Yeah. So Tigress, I think you mentioned something that's really, I think will also lead into Amy being able to provide an introduction of themselves. But I've also been seeing Fat Girls Hiking online, and I had seen that there were all these chapters sprouting up all over across the world. And I like to go outside and enjoy the outdoors as well. And so I seriously thought, should I start this chapter? Should I start this chapter? No, I don't have time. You're in school. So when I saw that Amy took up the helm to be the Phoenix chapter ambassador, I was really, really excited that she did that. So thank you.
How many of you have been hiking with Amy?
I have.
And folks online, I hope you've been hiking with Fat Girls Hiking if there's a chapter near you. Amy, tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been following Fat Girls Hiking, who's run by a woman named Summer. She started out in Portland. I've been following for a couple of years, and I lived in the Bay Area, and I wanted to start a chapter in the Bay Area, but then we ended up leaving. And I think finding Fat Girls Hiking kind of it happened the same time as I was learning to like love my body and to accept that like, yes, I'm fat and that doesn't mean that I'm a terrible person. So for me, it was like a really important space that I really cherished. And when I moved to Phoenix, my wife and I, we were the only people that we knew. So it was pretty lonely in the beginning, and I was looking for friends, and also I was looking to not be the fat friend. So I think that was something that I was kind of hopeful about. So I contacted Summer a couple of times, and then I filled out the application and got the ball rolling here in Phoenix. And we had our first hike at Papago Park, and then in Tempe. And our second hike was down in South Phoenix at Rios-Richardson. And then our third hike in March is going to be up in North Phoenix. So, I mean, for me, I'm new to the hiking world too. It's something that, like, for me, I'm just learning to enjoy hiking as I learn to love my body and figure out like what my limits are and how much I can do. So it's a space that is kind of vulnerable for me. It's a space that I knew that I couldn't feel 100% comfortable. Like my straight size friends would be like, let's go hiking. And I'd be like, I'll get back to you later, because I just wasn't sure how my body would fit in. And I didn't want to be in that kind of space where I felt like I didn't belong. So Fat Girls Hiking, I think, has created a space for me to embrace myself, and then also to like help me kind of deconstruct some of my internalized fat phobia, and to meet other people in the fat community. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I follow up with more specifics, I just want to do a couple of terminology notes. You said straight size people. Who do you mean?
People who aren't fat, people who can buy extra small to extra large size clothing in a store anywhere they go.
Yeah, that terminology is used a lot in fashion industry, but sometimes I find that outside of fashion people don't use it as much. But basically, whoever's not plus size gets referred to as straight size instead of just size, right? And Nikki, you made a distinction between plus size fashionistas and fat fashionistas. What's the difference?
Yeah, so for me, fashionistas are individuals who embrace the word fat, who generally are go a bit beyond just the general terms of body positivity. Individuals who are also visibly plus size or visibly fat. And so for me, finding fashionistas online has been helpful because I then can see how clothing is worn on bodies that look like me, which is really helpful because, you know, for me, I guess this is my personal story, for me finding fashion and finding clothes that I felt good in was really unique for me. And I feel like that is actually what led me into this realm of moving into fat positivity beyond body positivity. And the difference between body positivity and fat positivity is that body positivity is generally just this idea that every body is a good body, whereas fat positivity really grabs a hold of these ideas that fat bodies are also great and also puts them at an equal level of all other bodies. As we've mentioned, like, fat bodies are often vilified, and that's one of the reasons why I have personally taken up the word fat, and I call myself fat. And I don't know, it's empowering in a sense, and so that's what I mean by when I find that fashionistas and seeing them in fashion, it really is breaking outside of this like mainstream idea of what is beauty. That fat bodies are beautiful too.
It's that distinction is really important about body positivity versus fat positivity as well, because a lot of people who are who self-identify as fat activists are very aware and very critical of the way that body positivity has co-opted a lot of the ideas from fat activism, things that fat activists have been saying for 50 years, and then watered them down to such a point that fat people are not always welcome in body positivity, because anything you say that means you feel good about your body is accepted, even if that means it's disparaging of somebody else's body. And so that politic around accepting and centering fatness is one of the reasons why there are body positive events here. You know, we're focusing a lot on the local Phoenix area because that's where we all are right now. There are body positive events in Phoenix. There are plus size fashion events in Phoenix. And at those events, there are undoubtedly people who are fat liberation in spirit, right? But there's not the same sort of community connection that's centered around that specifically. And that's what one of the differences is. Mm-hmm. So talk about what it was like to plan the first fashion swap that you ever planned.
Oh my gosh, I was so scared. I was like so nervous. I was really nervous about making a mistake or getting something wrong. I don't consider myself a fat activist in the sense that like I feel the people that are fat activists are those that are out there like making major headway for fat people. The creator of the Can We All Go app, for example, the host of She's All Fat podcast. I feel like these individuals are doing a lot in like, you know, making really major changes in mainstream, national, across the U.S. But I also understand that like, you know, even doing this radical act of hosting fat positive spaces is an activist effort also. So I was really nervous of when we hosted our first fat clothing swap that I would say something wrong. Or that, you know, I would accidentally refer to my body in a negative way. And that's because I'm still learning. And I also think that, you know, that's very important to keep in mind as I move myself into this realm of hosting fat positive events, that, you know, I'm also learning and that it's okay. And that if I make a mistake, I'm just going to, you know, say sorry, I'm going to acknowledge the mistake and then move on. But I also wanted to make sure that we credited people that inspired us to host thought positive events. And so, for example, Gloria of Now Grown Positivity, she has these amazing posters about some guidelines around how to talk about bodies and when you're in fat positive spaces, not to use words that talk about weight loss, not to disparage yourself. And so we credited her. I wanted to make sure that we did that, as well as the Big Fat Super Swap in Minneapolis. That was a really big motivator for hosting the Fat Clothing Swap here in Phoenix. And so I think it's just being mindful of who came before us and making sure to credit some of those people that have made headway to be able to allow us to have, you know, a fat positive event and for it to be accepted. I was also nervous no one would show up, but people did. People showed up, which I think like points to the need for these type of spaces, to create these type of safe spaces.
And new people showed up, not just people who already knew us and loved us and supported us, like people who were also like, I'm going to drive to this event and I'm going to hear 6 commercials for Red Mountain weight loss on the way to this event, but thank God this event is there. Right. I jumped up because I wanted to grab this to actually share the verbiage that Gloria from Nalgona Positivity Pride uses to talk about creating safe space where fatness is centered and where we're being intersectional. When we talk about, NAAFA is working a lot on intersectionality. Live audience, do y'all know what that word is? Does anybody want to define it? And I'll tell your definition to the video audience. Do I have anybody who would be willing to do that?
My understanding of intersectionality, it's instead of looking specifically just at a fat body or just at a black body or just at a female body, you're looking at kind of the system and the multiple identities that reside in a person or in a community.
Yeah, so in case y'all couldn't hear that, I'm going to repeat what Becca said. She said, it's about looking at not just a fat body or just a black body or just, for example, a woman's body, but about looking at the ways, the intersections that those people have in community and how the world sees people with multiple identities, particularly marginalized identities. And so we're trying to be more aware of that with NAAFA. NAAFA has a pretty white cisgender history that was born out of straight men who wanted to support the straight cisgender women in their lives who were fat women. And certainly there have been people of all genders, all races, all ages who have supported NAAFA over its 50 years, but the perception of NAAFA is very much that it is predominantly a cis, straight, white organization with, with a few notable people of color or a few notable people who self-identify as queer. And so we're really trying to, at NAAFA, be conscientious of that and think about intersectionality and the ways that we want to make sure we're supporting the participants of NAAFA who come to us with multiple identities that are also oppressed. And to sort of like be conscious of that stereotype that we're very aware of the idea that people often say, which is fat is the last acceptable form of prejudice. And if you are someone who is experiencing other kinds of prejudice in your identities, you know that that's ridiculous. And then you feel shut out of that space that's supposed to be a fat positive space for you because they don't worry about the other things that you do when you walk your brown self out the door or wheel your brown self out the door or walk out the door with your same-sex partner or whatever. And so we're thinking about intersectionality a lot at NAAFA and how we can improve in that. And Nicky and I thought about it a lot in starting the Fat Force, and Amy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Fat Girls Hiking thinks about that. Gloria from Nalgona Positivity Pride does a lot of work around colonialism and eating disorders, and so she's highly aware of intersectionality. And she asks that people who come into her lectures, her spaces, her social media space, follow these guidelines, that they refrain from diet or weight talk, body policing, which is criticizing appearances, yourself or others, food shaming, which is judging food options or eating habits, health or concern trolling, keep your health advice to yourself, gender policing, which is reinforcing female or male roles, ableism, which is discrimination against people with disabilities, and racist beauty standards. Those are the things that she just doesn't, we don't do that here. And so we've kind of adopted that for the Fat Force as part of our guiding document. And Gloria, we thank you for that. And certainly there are lots of other organizations and activists who establish those kinds of ground rules around their spaces. Does Fat Girls Hiking have something like that?
You know what? To my knowledge, they don't. And Summer is a white woman who is very conscious of that and is trying to pull in ambassadors and people of color. So I think that there's a level of intersectionality that is there. I always wish it was more. I always wish it was more deliberate. I always wish it was more intentional. And I think that's why I jumped on becoming an ambassador in Phoenix, because I didn't want to be in yet another space where I was the token brown person, having to educate white people around me. So to me, and also on Instagram, you can follow these hashtags like taking a space outdoors, brown and outdoors. And for me, that is part of my experience in liberating myself to the outdoors and liberating my own body, is taking up that space, not just as a fat person, but as a queer person, as a first-generation person, as a brown person, as a Catholic, all of those intersecting identities are important to me. So I think, that was something that I voiced this summer as being valuable, and she agreed that those were important tenets of health.
Well, Amy, so I've been on a couple of Fat Girls Hiking hikes. One. Actually, not a couple, one. I've been on one. I meant to go to the December one, but I got really sick. But one of the things that I really appreciated when I went to the Fat Girls Hiking event was the land acknowledgement. And so when we think about intersectionality, that's also something as giving a land acknowledgement. And I know that's something we need to do, also as part of Phoenix Fat Force, is acknowledging that, here in Phoenix, that this is awesome land and Pequot people's land. And so that's part of that, is also paying respect to the indigenous peoples whose land we are on. But also going beyond that. And I think going beyond that is being respectful of the land and how we treat it, and then also being respectful of the indigenous peoples that are in this area.
Yeah, I think And, you know, one of the things that Nicky talked a little bit about is that sort of intimidation factor about starting your first event. If you're thinking about planning something, how do I know I won't mess it up? And part of the reason that we wanted to do this with people who had a variety of event planning experience is to sort of model that, like, you can start from nowhere. You know, when I started Full Figure Entertainment in Oakland, I had a lot of event planning experience around things like working at a school and planning a learning day for the kids or the faculty or the parents, whatever. I was a late bloomer to nightclubs, period. So I'd only been even going to nightclubs for a couple of years, and then the next thing I knew, I was running a nightclub event for 100 people, wow. You know, and I didn't know DJs, I didn't know venues, like I just started asking people or talking to people who knew more than me, and then I fumbled something. And still survived for 10 years doing it. Like, you can fumble some things and still, you know, and still do it. I had places where I wasn't aware about. I was lucky that in my first few nightclub venues, the venue spaces were accessible. So if I had somebody who had physical needs, they could be there. But when I had to move one of my events to a place that was in a basement venue, I didn't think through what that was going to mean for people who couldn't get to that basement. I was so excited. And I was trying to be intersectional, right? It was a predominantly POC event, people of color event, mostly Black folks, but not exclusively. I was moving to a space that was a queer-owned business that was supporting the employment of transgender women. So I wanted to be supporting them in their economic bottom line, but it was like a really old San Francisco club, and it was not required to be ADA compliant because of the age of the space. And what they had for me was the venue downstairs, and I could either do my event there or not do my event at all. If I had it to do over again, I might have just postponed to make sure that anybody who wanted to be there could be there. But at the time, I was just thinking, well, look at all these positive community things it is doing. That's better than nothing, so do it, right? And there are conversations to be had about that, about thinking about accessibility. I had thought about things like the size of the chairs, the size of the bathroom stalls, the flow within the place. I remember talking about traffic inside, and I meant, like, can people walk around in here if they have wide hips? And people thought I was talking about the traffic outside, and they were like, girl, nobody cares about that as long as they can, you know, park. And I was like, no. Inside, what it's like for you to walk through this club is totally different than what it's like for my friend who's this wide to walk through the club, and my friend who's this wide to walk through the club. And I want those friends to be able to come. That's why I'm doing this, right? So I had that awareness in those areas, but I never thought about stairs, right? You're going to mess some stuff up sometimes.
I mean, I think also as fat people in a world where we are oppressed, I think we get used to those kinds of things. Like something I hadn't ever thought about, the fact that I could ask at a restaurant to be seated at a table rather than a booth, you know? So like those are things that, like, up until the last couple of years, I was just kind of like, this is just how the world is, and it's my bad that I can't fit into it. And I think that that's part of the fat liberation, right? That it is realizing that, no, we have voices and we have autonomy and we have a right to be in these spaces.
Right. And some people will, and some businesses and some organizations and some people will work with you and some won't. But at least you know what you're getting into, right? Nicky mentioned Can We All Go? There's another one, I think it's called Ample. There are a couple of apps that actually evaluate businesses to tell you how size-friendly they are and whether they have other accessibility things that you need to know about before you go. We know that there's a lot of overlap, especially amongst our fat elders, about fatness and disability. We know some of that has to do with medical discrimination against fat people and against disabled people, right? So there's a lot of overlap between disability rights activists and fat activists in terms of thinking about things like size accommodation and, you know, as an accommodation. And it's one of the things, so like one of the things I want to do as we continue talking is just kind of pause and highlight. These are actual tips for event planning. And what I will do later is I will write a summary for the NAAFA newsletter that recaps some of the tips we've actually shared. If you're not signed up for the NAAFA newsletter, if you're here with me live, you can sign up. There's a sheet on the table in the back. If you're online, you can go to NAAFA.org, and there's a sign up. You can sign up for the newsletter for free. This is one of the things that NAAFA offers to the community. You don't have to be a paid member. So we'll recap some of these like specific tips. But so far, specific tips. Don't be intimidated by your lack of experience. Most of the people who are doing this are not professional event planners that started that way. We're learning on the job, and people are so grateful to have you doing it that they're willing to be a little tolerant of the 20 minutes of ridiculous technical difficulties that you experience at the beginning of your event, for example. Number 2, think about accessibility issues. For the fat folks who are coming, and also for their, straight-sized allies who are coming. Just because the fat people don't need something doesn't mean you don't need to be thinking about it if you want to have allies involved. Think about whether you're creating a fat affinity space, a space that is for fat people, or a fat-centered space. A fat-centered space is going to be, this is about fat people, but allies are welcome, come on down. And a fat affinity space is going to be, allies, if you love us, we respectfully request that you give us some time to talk about our own issues without an audience who doesn't experience those issues. Those are 2 different kinds of events, and you want to be clear about which kind it is. We don't want to be unwelcoming to people of other sizes because we have experienced what it's like to be unwelcomed because of our size. But at the same time, there are times when we want to center our experience, and there are times when we want to exclusively talk about our experience, not how someone else can be a better ally. So you want to be clear about that. Are straight-sized people allowed to come to Fat Girls Hiking events?
Yeah. We had a couple at our last hike. And I'll admit, at first I was like, do they know where they are? But they were good with it. And so we were good with it. And there was an mutual understanding that the space was a space that was going to be happening. And I think as long as people are respectful of that, Fat Girls Hiking is open to everyone as long as they're respectful of all intersecting identities.
Yeah, so I was actually really, the way that I was promoting this particular event to some of my friends was actually from the aspect of, the space is also open to allies. Because as somebody who I am fat, I consider myself to be a mid-fat to super fat. And so I have a lot of friends that host events in spaces where maybe having some of this knowledge that we're imparting here would be beneficial for to create some more safe spaces. And so I was really trying to go that angle of people of all sizes are welcome to come to this particular event to learn. Tigress, I think you mentioned the tip number 2 about being, being cognizant about your events being accessible. And the way that I think about it is, I just mentioned that I consider myself to be mid-fat, super fat. I'll explain that in just a moment. But part of that is knowing that I have certain types of limitations to accessibility. The type of restaurant booth I can sit in. I get scared with certain types of foldable chairs. And so I think to myself, if I am of a certain size, and there are people who are larger than me, what type of issues are they facing? And that's kind of how I go about when I think about event planning. Can people go downstairs? There have definitely been events that I have not gone to because there's not an elevator. And, going downstairs might, limit me in some way, or having to get back up the stairs. One of the things that I really like about Fat Girls Hiking is the policy that they follow whoever is the slowest, whoever's in the back of the line is where the hike, happens at. We don't leave anybody behind. And so if that means that, the hike switches from being 3 miles to 2.25, I think was the last time that we did, then that's fine. It's the idea of getting out there and being with people and enjoying each other's company and seeing other fat bodies, I think is very powerful.
And also, I think what separates Fat Girls Hiking is it's fat bodies moving and not trying to lose weight, not trying to change our bodies. we are showing up with our bodies as they are and celebrating the ways that they move as they are. I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I reflect on often is that one of the most fat positive things I saw in my youth, if I turn the sound off, is Richard Simmons sweating to the Oldies video. Because they are fat people dancing joyfully in terrible early 90s clothing, right? But like bright, colorful, loud, not like, oh, I must wear black because it's more slimming, you know, but like yellow stretch pants. And, you know, and if you just shut up Richard Simmons yelling about how many calories you're burning, it's actually one of the most fat positive things that you could see. Because it's just fat bodies moving joyfully and doing accommodations for the kind of bodies that they have. If they're not physically ready to do that movement yet, if they're not flexible enough, if they're having pain, if they're, you know, whatever it is, right? And it's also for people who need that affirmation that, you know, that fat people can have a higher fitness level than some of their thin counterparts. You can see that in those videos, right? Like you can see the 300-pound woman out exercising the 200-pound guy who just started the Richard Simmons program, right? And so there's all these like really beautiful demonstrations of fat positivity if you literally shut up the voice of diet culture. And it's kind of fascinating. And so it's one of those ways that you can stumble into fat positivity, but it's not intentional. So what we're thinking about is, how do you do that intentionally? Fat Kid Dance Party is a great one that does that. We did a NAAFA webinar with Eva Sheena from Oakland, who does a fat positive body movement class in Oakland. You can actually take her class through one of those NAAFA webinars on our website, naafa.org. We archive all of our old webinars. And, you know, so you can see some other examples of that. Because, you know, fat visibility is a form of action. If in this world, if you show up in your fat body just to do something, you're sort of an accidental activist. Because the fact that you're willing to be seen doing it in your fat body and that you're not there apologizing to anybody while you're doing it is a form of activism. You know?
I wanted to provide a clarification, I think, just on terminology for, so I just previously just referred to myself as a mid-fat to super-fat. And so I actually don't know where this started. Maybe somebody actually knows. I've asked about this online, but going around social media, there's this grid picture, four squares by each other, that sort of like talks about the spectrum of fatness. But mostly this is used in terms of accessibility. And so on the lower end, we have small fat, and these might be people who are of a certain size that, you know, are on the plus size clothing, but may not have issues with accessibility. So when they go to a restaurant, they're not very concerned with, you know, fitting inside a booth, or overly concerned about the chair holding their weight. And mid-fat, which I sort of identify on the larger end of a mid-fat, are people who are starting to be aware of those situations. Do I sit in a booth? Can I go to a concert? Will the chair fit me? So they're kind of aware of that. Yeah. Where do I go to buy clothing? I might be shopping more, you know, specialty clothing. I might not be able to find clothes in Target. So I might be shopping maybe like in Lane Bryant or Torrid. And then super fat are individuals who are constantly thinking about the privilege that, you know, that they don't have, or the oppression that they're facing in terms of seating. So flying on airplanes. Maybe they can't even shop in brick and mortar stores. Maybe they are only able to shop in online stores. And then on the larger end of the spectrum, we have infinity fat, which are people who can only shop online. They probably have to have their clothing custom made. These are individuals who, you know, have a lot of the accessibility issues that, you know, they're constantly thinking about going through door sizes, making sure that there are elevators for them. Maybe these are people that have having to use other types of mobility type of devices to help them get around, potentially. But that's sort of this idea behind the spectrum is having to do with accessibility. And the way that we think about our privilege within the fat spectrum. So I am also very aware that, you know, as a mid-fat to super fat. Like, I can go to a restaurant and I can ask to be seated at a booth or at a chair with a bench, whereas there might be people on the larger end of the spectrum who, you know, tend to do that. So that's just sort of a little bit of background on that particular spectrum, and I actually don't know where it started from.
I mean, I think
I've heard it talked on the She's All Fat podcast.
I'm gonna share something that Peggy Howell, our NAAFA media director, is sharing a comment in the chat. She says NAAFA historians told us that the term superfat originated many years ago and were women who could not buy their clothing from a manufacturer such as Roman's or Lane Bryant. Infinifat is a new term. I don't know who actually coined those terms either. I'll see what I can find out before I do the recap for the newsletter. It's definitely a conversation that is about accessibility and also about cultural privilege, because we know that as we start to see fat people become more visible in mainstream culture, like, right? Like, did y'all picture Lizzo when I said that? Like, more accessible in mainstream culture. We know that those people still get a lot of discrimination about their fat body. Did y'all picture Lizzo when I said that, right? But, like, so we know that people still get a lot of discrimination if they're outside whatever the cultural beauty standard is considered, or what are considered cultural norms. But we also know that as the norm is expanding a little bit, it only expands so far. So now we have businesses talking about being size inclusive because they make a size 2X. That sounds really great if you're a size 2X and you've never been able to buy their clothing. But if you're a size 4X or 6X or 8X or custom made, then 2X saying we include everybody, it's just false, right? It's just false. And so that's another tip for you to think about if you're thinking about fat positive events. You know, is your event really for everyone in the fat community? Do you have seating for Infinifat, right? Are you attracting a lot of smaller fats who don't get along with Infinifat, who don't want to be that, and who talk about it that way? Are you an event that's specifically focused on the needs of people who are mid-sized fats or super-sized fats or Infinifats? And then this is not the right affinity group for somebody who is a size 16. Right? Like, there's a real and much fuller than we can get into today dialogue about the differences in privilege and how those work in different social circles within fat community when it comes to differences along that size spectrum. It's not only about, like, the physicality, the clothing accessibility or the space accessibility or whatever. There are also cultural differences. There are differences in terms of how people see people for dating and romance and sex. There are differences in what that means for you getting a job if you're a certain size versus another size, and even how those people talk about themselves. Some people on the smaller end of the spectrum still talk about themselves as fat, and they have a politicized view of what fatness is and what fat community is. And then other people are Ashley Graham making up words to use to avoid the word fat because they are one of the most famous plus-size models in the world, but they don't have an ounce of fat on them. And they don't want to be associated with people who look like us, unless they can get our money for some of the clothing that they're selling. But that's not okay. And so when you're thinking about event planning, one of the things is to be really clear. If you are planning something that is not going to be accessible for people who are at the larger end of a plus-size scale or larger end of those sort of fat identity terms, then be clear so they don't show up and waste their time. And if you're planning something that is specifically for those folks, then let the smaller fats know, just like you let the street size allies know. This one's not for you. We love you, we're in community with you, and this one's not for you. This one is for the women who are size 28. You know, this one's for the bigger guys who, like, everybody says, fat guys can still find love, and then if you're fat after a certain point, they don't say that about you the same way. So we need to have a meeting for men who are bigger than that size to talk about how they found love in their lives, or whatever it is, right? Like, whatever the thing is, to be clear in your language about how you're identifying it. So that I hope that you want to plan some events that are inclusive of the full scale of fatness, right? But there are going to be times where it's appropriate to have more niche events that are for particular subgroups within the community. And then how do you communicate that with everybody else so everybody knows what they're getting into?
Yeah, I was going to say that I've referenced the Big Fat Clothing Swap in Minneapolis. They actually do this. They started, I think, just through hosting their events, they recognize that they actually receive a lot of participation from the small mid-fat spectrum. And so they receive like a whole lot of clothes in those clothing ranges. And so what they started doing is separating out, and they have 2 events actually for a small to mid-fat community, and then they have the mid-fat to super-fat, infinity-fat clothing swap. And they do something too in terms of recognizing, you know, that the smaller fats, they have a certain type of privilege with having such an abundance of clothing that's made available to them. And so they also differentiate between the 2. But I think that's just as one example about how to go about doing that and being very aware and cognizant of planning events for a variety of sizes.
Yeah, another example of that out of the Bay Area is the Cupcakes and Muffin Top sale that's done by the Big Move dance troupe in the Bay Area. You know, they've been doing it for years, and it's and so they've learned a lot of things along the way. And one of the things that they now do is open the sale earlier for people who are supersized or people who have accessibility needs, because it's hard to get around their sale when there are 100 people in there. So that these 10 people who need to be in there on their scooters come in an hour early and scoot around before everybody else gets there. And there hasn't been any pushback to that I know of. There, you know, it's not like all the, you know, able-bodied or smaller fats were like, how dare you? We should have equal, like that's when people get that sort of difference between equality and equity, and when you're really doing it out of community values and activist values, then you'll find that people will make more space for that than when you're doing it in a more mainstream setting, right? So I know, I'm looking at our audience here live, I know that what drew you here was something that you got from our advertising about this being a community-oriented and welcoming event. And I trust that if I had to ask one of you to switch chairs with somebody so that someone larger or someone who had accessibility issues or challenges could use that chair, you would. I don't trust that at every plus-size event, because plus-size doesn't convey the same thing to me as fat community. And so I can go to a lot of plus-size events, and I don't trust that the chairs, Nicky mentioned earlier, folding chairs. You know, like we call places. Do you know the weight level of your folding chair? Because if you don't have any that do more than 250 pounds, we're going to bring a few in, right? Most plus-size fashion events do not do that, even though they know that their audience is going to include people who are more than 250 pounds. It's not a value priority for them because they're not coming from a community, they're not coming from a fat community perspective, they're coming from a fashion industry perspective. And so some of them are better at it than others. And we are mentioning a lot of fashion things, because Nicky and I both have a lot of history with fashion, and because those are some of the most prominent plus-size events. And whether they are fat community events or not kind of varies from event to event. So again, you know, a tip for you if you're planning is to make sure that you're clear in identifying. And a tip for you if you're thinking about going is to not be scared to ask questions about that. If you weigh 300 pounds and you don't know what their chairs are, it's uncomfortable to ask. It's intimidating to ask. Maybe somebody can hold your hand while you call them and ask, or call them and ask for you. But first of all, that's better than you ending up on the floor. And second of all, maybe the next time that event planner does it, they'll put accessibility notes on their event information, you know?
In Fat Girls Hiking, there's a whole template of information that I have to fill out that gets sent to Summer, who creates the Eventbrite page. And on there is a lot of research that I do, and that all the other ambassadors do. We do a lot of research into what trails are accessible, like if they're ADA accessible, if they're paved or not. Excuse me. And in there, you know, put how many miles we're going and all that kind of stuff, the incline. So that way, people who are interested in the hikes can read and consider, you know, maybe this one is one that I want to go to, or maybe the next one is one that I want to sit out because they're going a mile longer than I would prefer to do. Or maybe, you know, they're going out and eating at a space and I don't really feel comfortable doing that. Like, whatever it is, people have a choice in opting in or opting out. And something that I've really appreciated in just a few months that I've been doing background hiking is getting input from the community members. People want certain activities to happen. People want certain trails to go down. And so being able to accommodate that while also keeping in mind the bigger picture of, like, we don't want to make this an exclusive event that not everyone has access to, so like making things as low cost as possible, and making sure that people understand, you know, if on a hiking trail there's a place where you can sit, if there's a place where you can use the restroom, if there's a place where you can eat, things like that are all important.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure we're a little conscious of time, even though we got started a little on a wonky schedule, and people who are watching this on recording don't know the difference. But for those who are here live, I want to make sure they get a chance to ask some questions and get a break, you know, to stand up. So live audience. So if you're watching online and you have some questions, get those keyed up in the chat window for us. Live audience, do you all have questions? Becca?
What experiences have you had with apps like Meetup? I know Meetup does have a lot of, like, that social groups that people can create on their own. And I've seen a lot of events there. It is pretty active here. I don't know what experiences you guys have with that.
So the question, if you couldn't hear it online, was what experience do we have with apps like Meetup or other kinds of social apps that help people come together and how they do things for fabulous?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I would say for background hiking, the mediums are mostly Instagram, Facebook, and Eventbrite. So what was cool was on the first Phoenix hike, we had a couple of people show up who shared the event on their Meetup page, which was for a fat friendly Meetup page. And then the next hike, they brought out more people. So in that way, they shared through that, but that's not a medium that background hiking uses.
Nikki, have you seen that used in the fashion community or in any of your other activist communities?
So I have seen Meetup being used in different ways, but I personally have not used Meetup. It's just not one of the platforms that I've, like, picked up on. Yeah. I've seen other things too, like Bumble and other kinds of things, but I feel like I've had, like, a really hard time, like, trying to find, like, you know, the fat acceptance kind of thing with those type of, like, friending kind of apps. So.
Yeah, and I think that some of those apps, especially the ones that tend to lean, Meetup doesn't lean really datey, but some of the ones that lean more towards dating and stuff will have more of a tendency to use terms like BBW or BHM, big handsome man, big beautiful woman, and a lot of folks who are more activist oriented lean away from that terminology. So then it's hard to be in this space where, like, the search terms that get you to who you want are search terms that you would never use for yourself in your real life. And that can be challenging, I think, for people using various kinds of, you know, social media or internet things to make connections. Other questions? Or experiences? Is it you have a question? Are you just waving? Were you just waving at Nikki? Nikki's got a fan club here. Does anyone here in the live audience have anything that they want to share as positive experiences with that community events, or as negative experiences that we can learn from? Okay, while the audience gets, oh yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's very experience. But I have to say that this is a really where not so much. So I was kind of surprised by that. But initially I had forwarded to some of the volunteers there. So I was just that, just having that as part of the registration, really like, I have to do this. I want to come. So this is the person that I ever reached.
Thank you. So what Anna was saying, Anna, right? What Anna was saying was that this is the first event that she's been to, even though she's super, you know, super aware of fat community and fat politics. This is the first event she's ever been to where someone asked about the needs for the chairs. We had a registration form on the Phoenix Fat page. The NAAFA had a registration form for people doing this by webinar. But for Phoenix Fat Force, we had a little Google form where we asked people what if you want to reserve a seat. And one of the questions was, can you sit in a regular folding chair that with a weight limit of 250 pounds? because then we know we can reserve that seat for you and leave other seats for other people. Do you need a large sofa or a higher weight seating? Because we knew that what we had here at Palabras were large sofas. I know there are folding chairs with higher weight capacities. I know in particular that when Crystal Bougon from Curvy Girl Lingerie in San Jose, California would do events, she would always have 1 or 2 folding chairs that had a 500-pound weight capacity. I think 500. And so she would identify those chairs, and then other people would not use them, so they'd be free for people who needed them, right? And then the other question we had was, do you need us to reserve space for you to bring your own chair or some type of mobility device that you'll be using? And so we just wanted to, you know, we want to have walk-ins, but we also want to know that if there are people who need those things, that we're preparing for them. And Palabras has been really great about helping us prepare for them. And I learned to do accessibility notes from Big Move, the dance organization in Oakland that I mentioned with the cupcakes and muffin top sale, because it never occurred to me in nightlife planning to actually have a thing that told people, like, it's this far from the parking lot if you have mobility challenges, or there are this many steps up to the door, so even if you can't do stairs but you can do 3 steps, that's okay, but you can't do 3 steps if you're on a scooter or in a wheelchair, and you need to know that. Like, I had to have people I had to have good modeling from other people in fat activist community, and I had to have exposure to people in disability rights community to learn that as the more privileged person, it's my responsibility to preempt those questions so that people who have those needs don't have to go running around digging for that information. I am still not perfect at it. You know, we are learning at NAAFA, we're getting better at, and with Fat Force too, we're getting better at making sure that that we include descriptors on our social media posts for people who are using devices that help them, you know, read out loud what I don't know what the name of the device is, but that help, that read the captions for them, but then they still don't know what it looks like. And so you've probably seen this, hopefully you've seen this on some social media posts where people will actually describe the picture so that somebody who's using an audio aid to help them know what's on social media gets a description of the visual part they can't see, not just the caption, right? We're doing that on our NAAFA post now, and we've done it so far on our Fat Force post, but I'm definitely still imperfect at that on my personal page, and I don't see a lot of events doing it. So it's a learning curve, right? And like, if you did it wrong the first time, that doesn't mean now you can never have a fat community event anymore because you ruined everything. Right? But that's how we feel sometimes, like, oh, I might misstep and then they'll all be mad at me, you know?
Yeah. I really hope, so for the people that are online in the webinar, I really hope that this information is helpful. Personally, like, as I was sharing this event with a variety of people on Instagram, trying to get this out there, I had heard of different people in various cities saying that, you know, they wanted to start some type of fat community event, but have been scared or didn't know how, or didn't know what to think of, and so that they were looking forward to this type of event to be able to help them to be able to plan. I did want to point out one of the resources, I know that we're going to be closing up in a moment, is Fat Lips Podcast. So I believe it's Fat Lips Podcast. They actually did a blog post where they reviewed like a number of chairs that people can use for events and the amount of weight that they would support. And I know that Tigress and I have both reviewed that blog post when we were determining potentially purchasing chairs for our particular events, at least have like maybe 2 chairs that support higher weight. But there are definitely resources that are out there. It's just a matter of like trying to find and getting linked into those. So.
Yeah. I just want to share with you something else that was shared by one of our board members when, I think this was in response to the question about meetups. When we lived in Northern California, we weren't close to anything going on. We were about 70 miles away, so we decided to try to start a fat social group. It was before app days, so we made a little flyer and ran an ad in the free papers in Sonoma County. We invited people to join us for brunch. Turns out fat people on the streets weren't too happy about being handed a flyer that points out that they are fat. It never really worked. I had mixed experiences with this as a nightclub promoter because I was really worried about giving people flyers like, hey, fat girl, don't you want to come to my party? And I thought that I might really upset some people. I found that some of the women who modeled for me were better at it than I was in the first place, so I delegated it to them while I did other things. And they actually mostly had positive experiences with that. But that was also, you know, a different time and place than the story that Peggy is sharing. And it does point out the need to be sensitive when you're doing sort of hand-to-hand promotion. It's why word of mouth is really important from the people who get it, because they can kind of carry the message in a way, like, especially for beginners, right? You know, if you've got a friend who is fat and who could benefit from something like this, but is uncomfortable with the word fat, right? So it's much different for you to say, hey, friend, why don't you come with me to this thing, right, than it is for some other, you know, fat radical stranger in a body positive T-shirt to roll up on them and hand them a flyer, right? Because then there can be a little bit of that response of like, ooh, they identified me. Y'all all know those fat people who think it's a secret that they're fat, even though we can see them, and so you can't say anything about that in front of them. That's part of why we have spaces like this, so that those folks can get more comfortable with it, and so that those of us who are already more comfortable with it can just talk openly without having to dial it back, right? We have time for one more question online. Do any of y'all have a question? In Phoenix, do any of you have a question?
I can smell the fry bread.
Okay, yeah, we have a vendor here live. I'm sorry, online audience. Mario from the Res and Urban Eatery, who does amazing vegan and vegetarian Navajo tacos and other traditional Navajo foods, is here to feed us. So sorry you can't join us for that, because we do understand that also fat people eating in public is a type of visibility that is really empowering for other people sometimes. I just want to share, ask each of our guests to share a couple wrap-up thoughts, and then I will, and then we'll let y'all eat and let y'all be sad that you're not eating with us.
So wrap-up thoughts?
Yeah.
Anything, you know, I'm just really happy that the fact that we started having these events and we started having these conversations about bringing fat folks together, and that people actually showed up. So thank you guys so much. I hope that you all will go back and like tell people and, you know, share this event with other people, and hope to see you at the next one.
Let's see. My thought is that I wanted to invite everyone to come to the next Fat Girls Hiking event on March 14th at 10 a.m. It's in North Phoenix, and all of the information is on our Eventbrite.
And you can find out about other Fat Girls Hiking chapters.
Yes, that's true. Other Fat Girls Hiking chapters. There are Fat Girls Hiking chapters. There's dozens of them all across the country, and then there's even a couple in England, I think, in Europe. So they're out there, and Summer is always looking for ambassadors for other cities as well. So if that's something you're interested in, follow Fat Girls Hiking and get in touch with Summer.
And Fat Girls Hiking is just Fat Girls Hiking on Instagram, right?
Fat Girls Hiking on Instagram.
Fat Girls Hiking, and Nicky on Instagram is
Redstreak girl, like a red streak in her hair.
Yes, and I on Instagram as an individual am I of the Tigress, letter I of the Tigress, and Nicky and I are also on Instagram as Phoenix Fat Force. That's PHX Fat Force, like Men's Force be with you. You can find NAAFA at NAAFA Official on Instagram, and then we're also on Facebook, and we're at NAAFA.org. Again, you can sign up for the NAAFA newsletter there, and you can sign up if you'd like to be on the Phoenix Fat Force mailing list, so you're not here with us live today. You can just email us at phxfatforce@gmail.com. So just, you know, I think the main thing I want folks to walk away from this with today, there definitely are more practical tips that we probably could have shared with you, and you can reach out at that Phoenix Fat Force event to get input from me and Nicky if you have specific questions for Amy, and can't get to her through Fat Girls Hiking. You can message us and we'll get the message to her if you think of things later after you're watching this. But you know, I will share some more tips in the NAAFA newsletter. And but also the main thing we want you to walk away with, I think, is the idea that you don't have to already be an expert at this to plan something. You just have to put the word out and you get a few people. And if you get 4 or 5, if there had only been 4 or 5 of you here today, we still would have done something else again to see if there were 5 or 6 of you the next time. You know, some venues are super supportive, others are gonna go somewhere else. You know, you can do more informal things, like there's a fantastic fat girls brunch group in the Bay Area, and it's literally just started with like a few friends saying, we're all fat and we all use the word fat and we want to have a fat specific brunch, you know, and now there are like 30 people who are, you know, who alternate at those brunches. So it really it doesn't have to start as some big formal, it doesn't have to be a big convention or a big nightlife event or a fashion show or a clothing swap. You know, it really can just be a few like-minded folks together and then connecting with some other ones. And I have found in my experience that people who do these events are super excited to have other people doing that, because we all want a chance to go to an event that we're not responsible for. So we want to see you do, we want to see the community grow and be strong, and we also want to have places to go that we don't have to run the thing. So if you know someone in your area who is doing a kind of event, even if it's not the kind of event you want to do, seek them out for advice. I think you find that, you know, offer them something for their time and labor if you are able to do that. And if you're not able to do that, don't let that stop you from asking questions, because I have found people to be incredibly generous about their time when it comes to giving advice for starting fat community things. So thank you on behalf of the NAAFA board for your participation in the webinar. The link to the recording will be on the NAAFA website and will be posted on social media. If you were registered, we'll also send it to you by email. And then we don't have an exact timeline yet, I'm sorry, for the transcription, but we will have a transcribed version as well and a recap in the NAAFA book. Thanks, everyone. Phoenix, do you want to say good night? Good night. Thanks, everyone.